Hello and welcome everybody to Learning to Love Induction Cooking with Peninsula Clean Energy. And what we have today is a chef-guided demonstration of residential cooktops. We're going to be talking about the hows and whys, and then we'll wrap that up with a little bit of a demonstration to show how all of these things apply. If you could click on my screen real quick there to get it to activate. There we go. Awesome. My name is Mark Dusler. I'm the consulting chef here at the Food Service Technology Center. I work for Frontier Energy, and we've partnered with Peninsula Clean Energy to bring you this presentation and help everybody learn a little bit more about induction and its benefits. So on today's menu, like I said, we're going to be looking at what induction cooking is, and we're going to be doing that by looking at how to temper chocolate. We're going to use that because of precise temperature control and has some stability benefits and things like that. We're also going to be caramelizing some bananas and making some crepes. It's really to kind of tie all of the things that we're going to be talking about together. So first off, what is induction? Well, how does induction cooking work? What we have here is we have this electric current going through a copper coil. This copper coil makes this magnetic field, right, as we can see here, and inducing that magnetic field, what we're doing is essentially we're taking a bunch of molecules and we're rubbing them together, and just like our hands, when we rub them together and we agitate them, it makes heat. Well, if we do that with varying intensities, we can actually accurately control temperature in the pans. So induction ready or magnetic cookware generates the heat. It's not the actual stove or range top itself. It's actually the pan that generates the heat. And that's why we have such good efficiency and such good control when we're using induction over, say, resistance coil or even a gas range. And what we have here ultimately, like as I just said here, that hot cookware is actually what's heating the food. So let's look at the inside of an induction hob, kind of help explain how that works. Well, the induction unit, to be accurate, is actually using feedback. What you can see there's that copper coil, obviously that's round around, and that copper coil is what's generating the magnetic field. And then in the center there, we have a temperature sensor. That temperature sensor is actually taking the temperature of the glass, and what it's doing is it's saying, well, this is my temperature on the glass, pardon me, on the surface temperature of the glass, so I can adjust accordingly to help maintain that temperature. So you can adjust temperature in two different ways typically, not always, but you can, on some units, you can use precise temperature control where you can say I want to have it at 185 or 200, or you can still just use a power setting. And there's various types of power settings. Some of them are 1 through 10, some of them are 1 through 20, but still generally the same idea as you would see like on a normal range top. And then of course inside there you can also see there's the guts of the heat sinks. It's very important to keep induction units cool because they do have, as you can see, their circuit boards and things like that help run the system. Here we can see how that works when we're talking about heating the pan versus heating the cooktop. And if you look, we took a piece of chocolate. What's interesting about chocolate is its melting temperature is right around our body temperature. That's why if you look at a lot of chocolatiers, they'll touch their lip when they're trying to adjust chocolate, because we know that there's a lot of blood within our lips, and because those temperatures are so close, we can really accurately gauge when chocolate is going to be tempered or melted. And as you can see here, being that chocolate is so sensitive, you can see on the pan side, the chocolate is actually melted, whereas on the cooktop side, we can see that the chocolate is still solid. And that is just what we talked about there. We're able to really just heat the pan itself rather than the entire cooktop. And also, obviously, precisely, because the chocolate would burn if we weren't able to precisely control that temperature, which is really a bit of a challenge when you're using gas ranges, and especially electric resistance would be very, very difficult. The swings in temperature are just pretty great. So with that too, as we saw with the chocolate, another interesting component to that is that when you remove the pan, it actually turns the unit off. So unlike a traditional range, be that electric or gas, if I remove the pan, right, the unit is going to still just keep putting out heat. It doesn't know that I've removed it. But because we take the pan away, we've just, that magnetic field has been disrupted. Now, because we disrupted that magnetic field, that means that obviously it can detect that there's something wrong there and it's not going to work, and it just shuts off. So what that does is it has a great opportunity to help save your energy, help save heat in your home, and also just makes things a little bit more safe, which we'll discuss here in just a moment. So induction cookware needs to be magnetic. As we discussed, that magnetic field, of course, needs some type of iron or steel, which contains iron, to make that work. What we're talking about here are ferrous metals. So a ferrous metal, being magnetic, makes that magnetic field work. There are some units out there that can do this without a magnetic field, but they're very, very expensive and probably not really that useful on the day-to-day in the everyday world. So what we're saying here is we need this to be magnetic. So you can either judge that by looking at for pots and pans with the Induction logo, or you can stick a magnet on there. Now the magnet can sometimes be a little bit misleading because some pans may not contain enough, or the magnet may not be strong enough, or there may not be enough iron within the pan, but it still might work. The good news is the best pans for this are cast iron pans, right? Because they contain a lot of iron. I know a lot of people say that maybe they're a little bit too heavy. They can be a little bit difficult to handle, but I think a lot of times if we are just making like one pan meals or things like that, I personally use cast iron pans all the time. I find them to be incredibly useful. They're great at retaining heat. So when you're putting something in the pan, the temperature doesn't drop too fast. So if you're searing or doing things like that, it's a really great way to just do everyday cooking. But if you are potentially looking at new pans, I would say, if you're doing that with respect to induction, start looking for the logo. That's usually a good place to start. The things you wouldn't want to get are copper pans. They're not going to work very well. Aluminum pans won't work. And to be honest with you, a lot of those pans really aren't the best medium for cooking anyway. And what I like to tell people too is I recommend paring that down. I came from the home where we had a million pans, and to be honest, I only have four hobs here, or 4 burners if you want to call them that. So how many pans could I possibly use? Outside of maybe holidays or things like that, which you maybe pull out specialty pans, and you could collect those as needed. But I would suggest maybe paring those things down and really just finding the 4 things that you like the most and really focusing on using those. Another option there would also be to use steel pans. The Crepe pan I'll be using today is actually just a steel pan, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So to summarize, induction is heating only the pan. I think that's really important to remember when we're trying to separate out induction from, say, even electric resistance ranges, right? Because we're still using that conduction, right? The coil is heating up and then trying to pass that heat energy into the pan, which now every time we're passing, right, we're going to have some type of inefficiency and less control. And as we all know, I've used electric resistance. We had them in our home. They were very, very tough to control. Their temperature swings were pretty high. And once they were hot, it was really hard to get them back down. So recovery was also a bit of a challenge, going both ways. We have built-in temperature sensors, which offer precise control. Now, that precise control doesn't always mean we're cooking by temperature. That precise control can also mean sometimes that we're just wanting to hold something. Like, for example, I have some salted caramel here, and I have my pan that I would like to keep seasoned, but I don't want them to be terribly hot. So the nice thing is I can keep them here. The temperature remains pretty stable. I just have it on warm, and it'll just maintain that temperature. Where that's also really critical is, let's say we are using electric resistance or even gas. As the liquid or as the volume of something decreases, it requires less energy to maintain that temperature, and that's when you end up seeing scorching or burning. The nice thing about the induction is if you maintain that temperature as things, as the volume goes out, let's say we're making a stock or a soup and that volume is decreasing, it'll maintain that same temperature. So there's less chance of that scorching or burning. Number 3 there is induction turns off when you remove the pan, which is pretty neat, right? I mean, I think that's pretty cool in this, not only from a energy efficiency perspective, but also from a safety perspective. We know that we're not just going to be leaving burners or elements on that could potentially be dangerous for somebody to touch, and you're just wasting energy up into the space. So, and finally, if a magnet sticks to the pan, it is induction ready, right? I think that that's probably your highest bar, but it is important to take in these other factors. And if you do have pans and you're not sure if they work, and maybe a magnet doesn't stick, again, maybe it could be the quality of the magnet as well. Sometimes refrigerator magnets, say, are not always the highest quality magnet. I'd say hold on to them, and you can always try them. And if they don't work, then make that decision then. But until then, just keep keep an eye out for that Induction Ready logo, and also just know that the more steel, typically the better performer. So some non-energy benefits, right? We were talking about safety, talking about easy cleaning, kitchen comfort. And kitchen comfort, what we're talking about there is not only hot surfaces, but also just all that heat in the space. So when we look at things like soups or stocks or sauces, where it requires a lot of heat energy to get water to boil. We know water requires a lot of energy to get it to work. If our ranges are only 35 to 50% efficient, which is what we see with most electric resistance, and gas is right around 35%, that means 65% of whatever you're using is just going right out into the space, right? That's just energy that you never got to use. And I think we've all seen when you go to the holidays or something like that, you walk into the kitchen and it's like, boom, you just get hit with all this heat and you're searching for the door, right? So what that is ultimately is just all the heat that you never used in cooking just escaping into the space. It's another way to think about that. And then, of course, it's going to cause stress on everything else in the house, right? Now the air conditioner might have to run more and things like that. And also if you're using, gas ranges and it is cold outside and all the doors are closed, residential hoods aren't always the best. You have a lot of carbon monoxide and gases and things like that spilling out. So we really want to take all of these things and look at them holistically, right? Safety, easy cleaning, kitchen comfort, and health, they're all intertwined. So first up, safety, right? We have this reduced fire and burn risk. We talked about it only heating the pan itself. So as you can see here, by placing this napkin here, if this was a typical range, that napkin would be on fire, right? But as we can see here, we're able to cook the mushrooms at a relatively high temperature, and we're not really seeing any issues with scorching or burning of the napkin. It's a great way to illustrate that safety. Now, obviously, if you're doing something at very high temperature and you touch that glass surface, it is going to be hot, sure. I mean, you're going to have some bleed, the heat is going to bleed back into the glass. However, your chances of it burning you as severely as, say, like a gas range or electric resistance it's not going to be nearly as hot as that. Induction cooktops are also more child safe for the reasons we just talked about. I burned myself on a little electric resistance range when I was a kid, and I remember that it hurt really bad, to say the least. And we had one of those ceramic tops, so you couldn't really see the coils if you were a child. You couldn't see that was even hot anyway, and it hurt pretty bad. And of course, on the bottom screen there, you can see where you have a towel catching on fire. That's a pretty common thing. All it takes is a little bit of grease to spill over a pot, and the towel sitting close to it, and you could have a real issue. So I think that's something you definitely want to consider. And as you can see there with the family cooking, everybody I think feels a little bit more comfortable, and that surface is just all around much cooler. Ease of cleaning, probably one of my favorites. As you can see, it is just a big glass top, right? There's not really as much scrubbing around burners, scrubbing around the coils and the elements and things like that, and pulling the whole thing apart. A lot of people do get concerned about the cracking or breaking of the induction unit. What I can say is the units themselves are pretty strong. It's a glass it's a glass ceramic hybrid, right? So it's pretty durable. Now, obviously, if you slam things on it, it's going to break. But I would argue that if you slam things on anything, they're going to break. It does require a certain amount of respect and care. As far as scratches and things like that go, you can do your best to probably not move things around and scratch it unnecessarily. But I haven't really found any issues with scratching as long as the cooktop is clean. And usually most of the things you're moving around on aren't any harder than the glass itself. So you don't really have to worry too much about that. They do make some polishing compounds if you want to do that as well. Or if you're doing a lot of low temperature cooking, sometimes what I'll do is I will keep maybe a towel around it if it's low temperature. Of course, always being safe with things like that. But the ease of cleaning is a big plus. Here we can demonstrate that, right? I threw some salt on the top of this one, and you can see pretty obviously that all you got to do is wipe it down, pull it off. And if you have these tabletop units, they can be kind of misleading. These tabletop units are actually quite powerful and can be a great way to expand your cooking if you need to. But they are also are able to be moved around, right? So if you have a unit like this, you want to pick it up, move it, wipe it down, put it back. It's a really easy way to expand and also maintain a good clean kitchen. So of course, the big one, right? Nobody likes those big hot kitchens. They're uncomfortable. So less waste heat creates a more comfortable kitchen all around, right? If we're not spilling heat out into the space, it's staying within our pan. And then any heat we do have, there's a better chance of that going out our hoods if we have, ventilation like that. That really works out better for just an all-around more comfortable space. And that in turn also means that maybe we're not using as much air conditioning, or we don't have to use as much energy to keep the house comfortable otherwise. So where does the heat go? This is a great graphic. We use a FLIR camera to do this. And what you can see here is 85% of the induction is actually heating the pan itself. So when you see that, that's the water inside, is that orange rising up to about halfway up the pot. That's actually the liquid inside heating up. Whereas, as we said before, gas rangers are about 35% efficient. We can see here that most of that heat's actually just going up the sides, and we're just, it's just spilling out into the space and really just not doing anything for us as far as, our end goal of cooking. So we can see that it's only heating the pan on the induction side, and of course on the gas side, you can see that it's really just heating everything and the pan. So it's not nearly as effective. So no flame means no harmful combustion byproducts, right? We're talking about nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide. In my home, we typically have our bedrooms to the back of the house, which is a little bit cooler. And almost every time we use our gas ranges, even with the hoods on high, it just ends up, those detectors end up going off, right? And that's just because the hood just isn't that effective, and that gas just ends up traveling around. Now, obviously, you can't see it, you don't really smell it, but we know that it's there, obviously, because the detectors go off, and we have children and things like that. So I think there is a real consideration there when you are doing this kind of just even everyday cooking, even if it's not that intense. You have to kind of just realize that there is those gases in the space if you are cooking with gas. So to summarize, no flame means less fire and burn risk. I think that's pretty obvious, right? If we don't have that flame there, you can't touch it, you can't get burned. I do want to emphasize though that I think the coils and the electric resistance to me are almost when I was in the 7th grade, I started a fire in my own kitchen. My dad was not happy about that, and it was with an electric resistance coiled range, and oil had just spilled over the sides. But because those coils were so hot, it didn't take much for that oil to ignite, and we had a serious issue. With so many, the most common house fires are done with frying, whether it be shallow frying or deep frying. And, that oil, once it catches, is incredibly hard to put out. I would say, of course, always smother it. But when you're in the 7th grade, you just throw everything you have at it, and hopefully it works. And luckily, we got it out. But the point being is that, having those coils, even though there's no flame, there is still a potential danger there. Precise controls can reduce, and when we talk about labor, what we're talking about is that effort, right? That effort that you have to put into something. And let's face it, effort is effort. So if we can streamline your life, how is that not, you only get so much time. If we can reduce that amount of labor, and of course, in turn, reduce that food waste, that's just holistically a much better approach. Easy cleaning obviously reduces labor and effort. I personally, we still have a gas range in our home. We have a little tabletop induction that we use quite often. And cleaning the gas range is a chore, it's a task. So it is nice to be able to have those things that you can just wipe down. And in case of the tabletop, I can just put it away. But also if I had, a unit like this, say, I can just wipe that down, it's ready to go, it's clean, and it's easy. Another nice thing too is if you do end up getting things stuck on there, like I made caramel, if sugar ended up getting stuck on there, you can use a razor blade just like you would on glass, and it'll actually scrape that right off, and the unit looks clean again. So the maintenance is very, very easy. And of course, as we just talked about, right, that no waste heat, it equals a more comfortable kitchen. If we're not spilling that heat out into the space, then therefore it's not going to be as hot. Now the challenge there is obviously that you want to be able to, or I'm sorry, the realization there is that the more waste heat you have in the space, that's just money that you purchase this gas or this electricity, and it's really doing nothing for you. If anything, it could actually be a detriment. It could be costing you money. So at the end of the day, I think it's about looking at all of these things in your home and understanding, what the give and take is. And of course, no combustion of gas means that you have no carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide in the space, which obviously for health reasons is always a plus. So cookware, we talked a little bit about this, but I want to come back and really reiterate how this works, because there is a performance aspect to this, right? Again, the higher the higher the amount of iron or ferrous metal in there, the better the performer. So sometimes we might attribute the poor performance to, say, the induction unit itself, but it might actually be the pan. And there are some units out there that are actually able to detect the type of pan that's on the unit, and it will adjust accordingly to increase that efficiency. So what it's doing is it's looking at that resistance based on the amount of energy it's putting into that magnetic field, and then with software, it's able to adjust that. And some will actually tell you how efficient your pans are. So when we use, or when we're going out to select pans to use, obviously cast iron is going to be our best. Enameled iron, so your Le Creuset and things like that, are really good pans to use. Stainless steel, we do want to note again that some stainless steel pans aren't compatible with induction. They will still work. We say not compatible because there might just be such a small amount of iron in them that they might not be good performers. And of course, blue or black carbon steel pans work really well too. So, you know, I think the other thing that people point out a lot of times with the cast iron and even the black or blue carbon steel is that you have to, you know, wash them. You don't want to put them in the dishwasher. I've met plenty of people who still put them in the dishwasher and it's fine. Although I will say, once you get them to be non-stick, if you just hit them with a little bit of water when you're doing your dishes or cleaning up, even if it, you know, you get some stuff stuck in there, if you boil that off just a little bit, dump it out, and you always just wipe it out with like an oil towel or something like that. I usually use like a canola oil spray in our house because we use ours every day. It's not a big deal. You just spray it while it's still warm, or once it's dry and while it's still warm. They're very, very non-stick and they will last forever. I mean, we have pans that have been passed down from generations. They last quite a long time and they're not very expensive. So I think it's a pretty reasonable way to go. The nice thing about the blue or the black carbon steel is they're a little bit lighter. As I said, you know, this is a carbon steel pan here, or a steel pan, and it's not heavy at all. Now you can obviously get of varying thicknesses and varying weights, but they're relatively inexpensive. I think this pan was $16. So really, it doesn't have to be this big spend to get all these pans, and they're durable. This pan will last a long time. And I'm also paring down the amount of things that I have in my home. I find that that's a kind of a stress releaser as well. So I don't have a bunch of clutter. That just makes me feel much better when I go to open up those cabinets, quite honestly. So let's take all of these things that we talked about, and we're going to apply them. What I've done is we've done a little bit of TV magic here, and we've made some of the components already. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk through those different pieces as the video is playing. And then what we'll do is we're going to live cook the bananas and sear and do that and actually make the crepes right here in the studio. So first up, we have, there we go. First up, we have our crepe batter. So to make crepe batter, it's not too hard. And what we've done here is we've actually included all of the recipes within this. So if you go and you download the handouts, you can easily just, you know, take these little these pages here, print them out. You have the crepe batter recipe as well as the method. So it's pretty straightforward. I really want to point out that it's important to start with your mise en place. I know that word gets really overused, but really what it is it's actually an approach to how you're going to cook. So all of these videos will actually start with that piece, and what it'll always show is, you know, the measuring of the ingredients first. I would recommend reading the recipes a few times and just kind of work it out in your head, even though it might seem a little bit confusing at first. Using the video will help because you'll kind of see a summarized version of that whole process all the way through. So of course, first what we're going to want to do is we want to measure our ingredients, and then we're going to melt our butter. And what's nice here is because we have that temperature control, I don't really have to worry too much about the butter ever burning or bubbling or turning brown or anything like that, as long as I'm using, you know, usually the same temperature setting, just as I would on any other range. Except in this case, what's nice is if I use a larger amount of butter or a smaller amount of butter, it's really easy to adjust that, and I really don't have to worry about it scorching. So then what we're going to do is we're going to whisk together our flour and eggs. We're going to add the milk and water. We'll add our butter and salt. So once the butter is obviously a liquid, it's much easier to add to the mixture. And the salt is pre-measured as well. And then we beat that until it's smooth, and we have our crepe batter. So what are some of the highlights of using the induction? In this case, we're really only using the melt butter, but it is really a great opportunity to show that precision and performance, right? We have an even cooking surface. We're not seeing, especially with like electric resistance, as they start to warp pans, you see browning on one side maybe, and then it's not so hot on the other, or they tilt, which can be a challenge as well. Everything slides over to one side. This side burns, this side doesn't. That isn't really an issue with induction. It's not an issue at all. We have a really consistent temperature. So one of the things that a lot of people bring up when they talk about induction is that they can't see the flame, right? We like that feedback. We'd like to be able to see that flame and understand, what the intensity is when we're cooking. And when we don't have that flame, it makes it a little bit hard to understand or to realize what we're doing. Well, by using the knob positions, what we start to do is we just start to remember those knob positions. It's not really that hard. You just have to go through it. You have to cycle, and it's just like riding a bike. You got to practice and practice. But if you've cooked before, it actually becomes pretty intuitive. And where it ends up being easier is because the temperature is so stable. By just remembering those knob positions, it's actually pretty quick. The other nice thing is that, of course, we have a cool surface. I have 3 pans on here right now, and I can touch the center of this. It's not a problem. Is it warm? Yeah, it's not too bad though. And we have fast temperature response. So chocolate creme on glaze, this is probably the most intense of all of the recipes in here. And really what we're making here is a chocolate sauce, but we're gonna make that nice and rich. So what we're gonna do is we're adding a little bit of whole milk, heavy cream. We're using eggs, so it's like a custard in a sense. And what we're gonna do here is measure our ingredients, of course. We'll go through this. Like I said, all the videos include the measurements, so you can kind of see some different methods here. One method I like is I crack all my eggs, and I find that if I, I wash my hands, of course, and I take the yolks out and I separate them, I have less of a chance of trying to, or breaking the yolks and things like that. It's a more delicate way of doing it. And now I can save my whites and do something else with those. I've reserved just my yolks for this, and then get rid of the shells or whatever you want to do, compost them. We're going to bring our milk and cream to a boil. And then just like with most, whenever you're going to combine eggs and sugar, you always want to combine them together. What I would say is you don't want to do that too early. So as your milk is coming to a boil, then you really want to whisk together your eggs and your milk. The reason being is if you put the sugar and the eggs together too soon, it's almost like curing them, right? Sugar does a lot of the same, it has a lot of the same properties in that way like salt does. So if you put a lot of salt on something, it'll cure and pull the moisture out. Well, sugar will do the same thing with the eggs. So what you want to do is you want to mix those together right before. And this is a neat little trick. You just take a towel and you twist it up, a wet towel. You twist it up, put the bowl in there. And by doing so, it keeps the bowl stable and you're able to add your milk and cream to your eggs, pour it right back into the pot. Now the nice thing here is I didn't have to worry about any scorching really because that precise temperature control. Put it back in the pot. We're going to reduce that heat to medium. The nice thing here is also if I have like a little bit more in the recipe or a little bit less, it's much easier to scale that heat and temperature control. And then what we're doing here is I'm actually moving that spatula back and forth. And what I'm doing there is I don't want the egg to sink to the bottom and actually start cooking and making scrambled eggs on the bottom of the pot. So I just scrape it back and forth real easy. And what that does is prevents that from happening. Once the mixture becomes a little bit thick, almost like you think of like a hot pudding would look like, that's when we take it back over. As you saw there, we poured that into the chocolate, and then we put that through a fine mesh strainer, and that's what allows us to have this nice, wonderful, rich chocolate sauce. Now the reason we do it that way, or the reason I like to do the en glace that way, is now I have a chocolate sauce that will hold up over time. One of the tricks to work that we do in restaurants, say over at home, is we want to try to get as many of the things ready and prepared ahead of time, but while retaining that quality. So by making the en glace rather than saying just a straight up chocolate sauce, one, we have a little bit more richness in the dish, but I'm also able to have something that's still like liquid and pliable. If we made like a traditional chocolate sauce, we'd be using like corn syrup or a simple syrup or something like that, and then just melting chocolate and adding it together. It's kind of more of a one note, think of like a chocolate syrup. Whereas in this case, we have a little bit more richness. And that richness will help carry your bananas and your crepes and really help meld the dish together. So some of the highlights here would be that we We bring the milk and cream to a boil. That precise temperature control allows us to bring that to a boil. We're not going to scorch it. Once you remember where that knob position is, you can just keep using that over and over again. It's not so much of a guess. When we put it in the pot, reduce it the heat to medium, our recovery is pretty quick. So because of the efficiency of the induction, getting back up to the temperature we need is pretty fast, and you're able to just leave it at that temperature and just maintain. In the stirring, pardon me, in that stirring and scraping, because we have that nice even cooking surface, it's allowing that egg to cook more evenly. So we're able to make that mixture quicker because we're using the entire surface area of the bottom of the pot. We have less of a chance of scorching on the sides, right? So that's one of the big issues is we'll talk about when we make especially the salted caramel, is you'll talk a lot about like washing down the sides of a pot. And the reason you have to wash down the sides is because of that convection. Again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But that also plays into when you're making other very sensitive mixtures, especially with eggs and things like that. So as we're stirring, we're really just focusing on that bottom part of the pot. We don't have to worry about the eggs scrambling up the sides and messing up the consistency. So brown butter and walnuts, I added in a few little components here, I think just to help add some complexity and maybe some texture to the dish as well. So it's pretty straightforward. In this case, what I did was I just literally took walnut pieces. I measured them out. You don't have, I mean, you can play with this one. You don't always have to follow the exact recipe. You can do it however you like. But really what we did here is, as you can see there, that's the caramel working on the outside. Just put a little bit of butter in the pot, started melting that down, and then you let the butter get brown. We add in our walnuts. And what we do is we just reduce that heat. And essentially what we're doing is we're just toasting those walnuts on the stove. Now you do want to keep stirring them around. So every couple of minutes, once you have your temperature setting where you like it. So in this case, I used medium. You just keep moving around until they're nice and toasted. And then what you do is you spread them out onto a baking sheet. And what that does is allow some of the butter to drain away and allows the nuts to cool. By doing that, you're also allowing whatever moisture is inside the nuts to evaporate away, and that'll help make them a little bit more crunchy. So some of the highlights there, we have melting, right? So again, back to that brown butter, we're able to control that temperature. You can go from brown butter to black butter pretty fast, or burnt butter, I guess, if you don't have that precise temperature control. Knowing where that medium heat setting is really nice. Remember, we were talking about looking at the burner versus knob control. Well, once I start remembering what medium can do, I can apply that to lots of different things, and I feel pretty comfortable about that setting to do anything from toasting to maybe my egg cookery. That becomes very intuitive. And the nice thing is because of that stable cooking temperature, that's not really too hard. And then stirring regularly. I put that stirring regularly because we have such a nice even temperature at the bottom of the pan, I don't have to worry about, like I said before, if the pan is a little bit sideways, or if we have uneven burning, the burner, like maybe one side of the burner is hotter than the other, we could have a real issue with one side burning quicker or cooking faster than the other. So because we have that nice even heat, stirring regularly is enough to get a pretty even toast on those walnuts. So I threw in also this vanilla bean whipped cream. This in itself does not use the induction, but I like that in the dish, so I thought I would throw that in there. And here's the method for that. We have, of course, measuring our ingredients. We combine those ingredients, and then we whip to soft peak. It's pretty simple. I use vanilla bean here. You can use vanilla extract if you like. We use heavy cream, and then just a little bit of sugar. I really like to keep it pretty simple, right? The idea here is we're actually adding a little bit of lightness to the dish, but because the cream has fat in it, the fat actually helps meld a lot of flavors together. There's this adage, or I don't know if it's a maxim or whatever you want to call it, like fat likes fat. So think about like nachos or something like that, right? You have a tortilla chip that's been fried, and then you put cheese on there, right? You actually have two items that are fairly heavy, but they do tend to complement each other. They like that. So there's two different ways you can do that. You can, of course, do it by hand, or you can do it in a mixer. In this case, I did it in a mixer. And then once it's whipped, you're ready to go. Put it in the refrigerator and reserve. The caramelized bananas. We're going to go through the caramelized bananas actually here, but I can't go through the method. It's pretty simple, really. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of sugar. We'll measure out our sugar. In this case, I've done it a few times, so I'm going to cut my bananas. I'm just going to add sugar by sight. And really what you're doing is you want to toss those bananas in that sugar so you can get that caramelization or that browning in the pan itself. right? But you want to do that right when you're about to sear them. The reason is one, bananas don't hold very well if you just let them sit; they'll turn mushy. And it just they won't it just won't work out. So by tossing the bananas, and we'll cook them in the sugar here, what we'll do is we'll sear them, which we'll show here in a second. But the reason I show that making the caramel is what we're going to do is we're actually going to sear the bananas, and then we're going to add the caramel to the bananas, right? So as you can see here, that nice even heat, that nice control allows me to actually make caramel pretty fast, and I don't have to wash down the sides. So because I don't have that convective heat rising up the sides and potentially scorching the sugar and making a burnt sugar, which then just makes my entire caramel taste burnt, I'm able to do all of that in a pretty controlled fashion. So here we can see the slicing of the bananas, which we'll do here live as well. Drag them all into the bowl, right? And we're going to toss those with a little bit of sugar. Move those around. And really, our goal here is to get some nice color on our bananas, and then we're going to add our caramel to them. What that does is allows us to control the consistency of the bananas before before we plate. It'll allow them to be held a little bit longer. So we put them all in, we flip them all over, right? The reason we use butter, there's kind of that thing that's like, oh, you only, all chefs always just use butter. Well, butter is appropriate in certain things. The reason we're using butter here is because butter has sugar in it. So when we're using butter, it actually helps caramelize things a little bit better, and it adds a little bit of richness. Now, not everything always needs that richness. So there would be times when you'd want to use an olive oil or a different oil. But in this case, we want something that's warm and melds well. So here you can see our caramelized bananas, and they're ready to go. And the nice thing about that is once I'm done, as you can see here, before even the sugar had a chance to set on the top, I just wiped it down with a wet rag, and I'm ready to go. Cleaning was nice and easy. So just to recap here, right? We want that cooking to the amber color. Again, we have that precise temperature control. It makes it very, very easy to be able to get the caramel to the state we want. And then once we have to add in our cream and everything else and our butter, that's really not that much of a challenge. I can remove the pan. The unit will turn off for a second. I can add those things if I need to, put it right back on, and I can keep going. But I'm not using any energy during that time. And then reducing the heat and add water. The nice thing about induction, unlike probably one of the parallels you will see with gas ranges and induction is the responsiveness. So the nice thing about using a gas range is as you turn it down, that responsiveness is immediate, or that response is immediate. Well, induction is the same way. As we turn it down, our temperature will drop quickly. The plus side to induction is that as we turn up, that actually our temperature increases much faster than with a gas range, and that's just because of that efficiency. We're heating the pan rather than making flame heat the pan, and then the pan heats the food inside. Tossing the bananas in the sugar. In that case, yes, again, we have that nice temperature control, so we're able to get the pan to the exact temperature we want. We have that nice even cooking surface, so I'm getting a sear from edge to edge in the pan, therefore allowing me to use the entire pan. And of course, in the adding of the caramel, I'm able to reduce that temperature without having to take the pan off of the stove to do so. So like if I was using electric resistance and I say turn it down to low, that really wouldn't matter too much, right? I'd have some serious issues. I'd end up probably burning it. So with this, I have that precise temperature control. So let's plate some crepes. So first, like as I said, we're going to cut some bananas up, and we'll toss them, and I'll actually sear them right here before we make some crepes. Good. Okay, great. So we have 3 different pans here. I have my sear pan, which I'm going to be searing my bananas in. I have my crepe pan, which is just hanging out here, nice and warm. That's the nice thing about that temperature control is because I have the pan right here and it's just kind of hanging out. I can keep it oiled, and I don't really have to worry about smoking. And it helps maintain that seasoning and keeps the pan nice and warm. Here I have my caramel, kind of doing the same thing. It's just hanging out nice and warm so I can keep it liquid, but I don't really have to worry about it, burning or scorching or losing too much moisture, and then of course separating, which we don't want either. So over here, I have a few bananas. I have my bowl. First off, I think we'll do 3 bananas. 3 bananas seems nice. Take our bananas. Of course, I have my part of your mise en place is making sure we have our bin. So this is my trash bin for my peels. And I'm gonna Peel my bananas back just like so. I also invite everybody, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box, and we'll address any questions you have at the end. We'll leave enough time for that. So as you're watching, if you have any questions, there's actually my wife turned me on to this not that long ago, but actually the proper way to peel bananas from the other side, I still have not fully gotten there yet. I've been peeling bananas the other way for so long that I don't know. I haven't got there, but I'll try it right now. And you can just pull this back. These bananas are still a little bit green. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because I am going to be tossing, I personally am not a big fan of like really green bananas. However, there are times when it is more appropriate because they're a little bit stiffer. We're going to be cooking them with sugar and butter, so it should be okay. Think of like the texture of, say, like a plantain or something that really only eats well once it has been cooked. So what we'll do is, we'll put our bananas here, and I'm just going to simply cut them into pretty uniform pieces, just like so. I'm going to keep the little nubbin over here. I have 3 kids, so they'll eat the nubbins. They don't go to waste, that's for sure. Okay. So I have this pan over here. It's on like a low medium, right? Now I don't have to do that. I could just keep the pan cold, but in the interest of time, I decided to keep the pan in low medium heat, which is nice because now it just holds here. I don't have to worry about it swinging in temperature too much. So I have my bananas in here. I'm just going to take a little bit of sugar. And really what you want to do here is just coat them with a light amount of sugar. It doesn't need to be terribly heavy, but what this will help do is, get that caramelization. So here's our bananas. And then we'll come over here. I'm going to just check the heat. Feels a little bit warm. That's okay. That's actually not too bad. And if I get a little bit of brown in my butter, it's not the end of the world. I have brown butter in my walnuts, things like that. There's a difference between, brown butter and burnt butter, of course. So what we have here is, a nice well-coated pan. Now I might have a little bit too much butter. I'm actually going to take out just a little bit of this because that might make my sear not as quick. Right? If I have too much fat in there, it's going to not let my banana sear quickly. So I'm going to turn it up to medium now as I start putting my bananas in, like so. And the nice thing is because of that responsiveness, I can actually, if I say, it's just not that hot, I need it to be a little bit hotter, my bananas are not cooking quick enough, I can adjust that temperature. I'm almost up to, high now. And if I need to drop it back down, I can do so. I have a lot of control and it's pretty quick. So as you can see here, you saw how fast the bubbles increased, right? We cook with all of our senses, not just our eyes, though they're kind of a big deal. But if you're listening, to how fast they're searing. You want to see how well they move around. If they start to stick a little too much, maybe it means we probably should have put a little bit more fat in. Now I'm actually going to turn it up to just under high because I really want to get that color on there as quick as possible. Get rid of my bowl here. So as you can see here too, the pan from edge to edge is we're searing all the way around. So I'm not just really having to deal with just the small area here or coming up the sides, potentially burning the sides. It's really just cooking in the center. It is important though, with hobs or induction hobs to make sure that you're using the appropriate sized hob for the pan that you're using. So like if I was using this small hob over here, say, you would only see cooking in that very localized area, which could create a little bit of an issue. So you definitely want to make sure you're paying attention to what side you're using when you're, what size of hob you're using, depending on the pan and what you're doing. So we get a nice little sear here. Check the other side. That was the side I started on. So flip these over. And if you don't feel comfortable, flipping them with your hands, that's quite all right. You can use a spatula or you can just toss them around. At the end of the day, it's just about cooking and having fun. And You know, I always like to, you know, there's people who always talk about like, well, if I can't make toast, you know, my answer to them is usually, well, have you tried making it twice? Because for some reason, when we cook, you know, if we mess something up, it's like we're so, oh, well, I just can't do it. But there's so many things in life that we don't treat like that, like driving or riding a bike or things like that. We keep trying. You know, if we had that attitude about everything, we'd never walk or do anything else. But with cooking, for some reason, we take it very, very personally, which is okay. I understand it. But if it doesn't work out the first time, that doesn't mean we should just give up. So I'm going to turn this down quite a bit because, as you can see here, it's getting pretty dark. That induction's pretty intense. I'm going to add a little bit of butter. And the butter, what that's doing is it's acting as a buffer. So we get some nice color on the bananas there. Again, we wouldn't want to make that caramel. We wouldn't want to try to make the caramel in the bananas. If you did that, by the time you were done cooking all the bananas, you'd have a big pan of mush. They just won't hold up to that. So we make our caramel separately. And if you wanted to elevate this, you could, of course, add a little bit of brandy right now, and you would, we call it, you know, deglazing. You would take all those little wonderful little morsels and bits down here and pick those up and, you know, add that to the flavor. I can do that here with a little bit of the caramel. You know, the brandy adds a little bit of complexity, but maybe some people aren't too into that, so we'll leave that out of this dish. It's not necessary. And so now we have our caramelized bananas. So now I want to hold these bananas warm. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to swap this over, and I'm going to bring this pan over. Now this pan is a little bit, it's a little bit large for this, but that's okay. I can use a pan that's a little bit larger on the hob as long as it can sense the pan. It's not too big of a deal. But you don't really want to go the other way. That could be a bit of a challenge. So now here I have my crepe pan. If you notice here, I don't really need towels, right? So a lot of times you'll use mittens or mitts or towels when you're cooking. But because you don't have a lot of convective heat coming off of the pans, you don't really have too much of an issue with the handles being hot, and you don't have too much of an issue with that heat coming up and possibly burning your hands. Admittedly, even today, because I have been doing this for so long, I still have the tendency to want to grab, you know, once bitten, twice shy. I will still use a towel sometimes, but it's really not necessary because the handle itself is not hot. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to adjust our heat for our pan to make our crepes. Now, I like to hedge my bet a little bit, and I always spray them with a little bit of pan spray just to make sure they don't stick. You could certainly use a nonstick pan. I traditionally do not use nonstick pans, you know, the Teflon coated pans. I find that the Teflon ends up wearing off. And if you just maintain a good nonstick pan, it's just as effective. And I always kind of wonder, well, if the Teflon wore off, where did it go, right? And I don't want to eat that stuff. So I typically will try to use steel pans. And they also are much more even at even heating. So what I'm saying, what I'm talking about there is with aluminum, because it rises and falls in temperature so quickly, it's a good conductor. When you put something cold in there, that heat isn't very even. Whereas steel, it'll actually maintain that even temperature a little bit longer, and it's a little bit more stable. So just a little bit of that. And again, remember we were talking about butter. So the reason butter is good here is because the butter also helps give me a little bit of color. So as I move this around here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get that evenly coated in my crepe batter right here. I would say when you're getting ready to cook the crepe batter, usually you want to make it a day ahead of time, but you don't have to. And then let it sit, and so it'll be pretty thick if you pull it right out of the fridge. So you want to get it, let it come up in temperature. Now, obviously, once it sits out, you got to kind of take that into, you got to take that into account, and maybe it's not so good after that. But it is important to have it be a nice consistency when you pour, so you get a nice even crepe. So now what we can see here is we're getting pretty even heating all the way around. We're starting to see these little bubbles. I can adjust my heat pretty quickly. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. And what I'm looking for is that, see how it slides around a little bit? That means my nonstick is working. So once we get a little bit of color on there, and there's different opinions on how much color you should have on a crepe. I like a fair amount of color. I think it's good, right? So you can flip with your left or your right, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And you don't have to flip. I think flipping is often over exaggerated. A lot of times in kitchens, we like to use spoons and spatulas. You know, there's no reason to ruin something if you don't have to, and you want to be gentle. So what we have here is our crepe. We'll do 2 crepes for this dish. So we can fold it over. We can have it pre-folded. If you want to stuff the crepe, you can certainly do that. With the bananas, I would probably not, just because it'll look kind of weird, right? They're bulky. So that's 1 crepe. We'll come back over and we'll do another one. Again, I'm going to let my pan kind of preheat. It's pretty non-stick right now. I'll add just a little bit more butter to it. Same reason. Now you don't want to add too much butter, because then essentially you're just going to be frying it, which we don't want to do. And you'll find that, right? Again, it's about that practice. We find that sweet spot that we like. The only way you get there is just by making them a bunch of times. So you get that butter nice and evenly coated. As you notice, you'll notice here it's not burnt, right? So my pan was able to recover pretty quickly. Take that, pour it in. There's maybe a little, see how it's sliding around? There's maybe a little bit too much butter, but I think it'll be all right. We'll let that sit for just a second. And as you can see here, our bananas are holding up pretty well. The nice thing too is that because I'm able to hold my temperature nice and low, you know, normally that caramel would start to stick inside the pan. That would be a challenge. And then if I'm trying to plate, they're all over the place. That's going to be kind of a nightmare. Whereas in this case, I have plenty of control. So then what we'll do is we'll plate right after. Get this guy ready to go. I have all my ingredients ready. We'll get this one a little bit more color. So if I want to give a little bit more color, I'm going to turn it up just for a second. And what I'm looking for here is these bubbles. And then what you'll start to see is as the, you know, I turned it up and I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but you're already starting to see like this percolation around the edges. What that's telling me is obviously that the pan is heating up pretty quickly. And the nice thing is because of that consistency, you can basically start to cook by time, which is really nice. So if you're somebody who wants to be more exact, you can say, well, I know I like my crepe for this long on this side. As long as you maintain the same temperatures and maintain the same amount of crepe batter, you really should be okay. It'd be pretty close. What we'll do is we'll get a little bit of color on the other side. That's okay. I'll turn it up a little bit, get the color that I want. Bananas are good, ready to go. All right, great. So I take this off. The nice thing is, as soon as I take that pan off, there's no more energy being put into the hob, which also means that it's not just spilling into my space and becoming more hot. I'll fold this guy over. I'll put it on my platter and have it kind of pre-staged and ready to go. Put this back over here. And so then over here, what we have are the ingredients that we talked about. So I have my chocolate creme glaze. I have the whipped cream. I have my toasted walnuts. I have a plate here, and then I have my crepes. So the nice thing is, especially if you're going to be the one who's trying to cook for others, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you have as much done ahead of time, right? You don't want to be stressed out trying to do all this work all at once. So the more you can do ahead of time, that's really the key, right? That's what we do a lot in food services. You know, we call it the art of reheating leftovers, right? We get things to a certain point, and we either stop that process or we figure out a way to make that process or make the food even better by holding it in a certain way. You can think of braising or things like that. So we have here's our chocolate sauce. I'm gonna use a chocolate sauce as my base. I think that that's kind of a nice way to anchor the whole plate. And then as you also eat your bananas, you get a little bit of the chocolate, but it's not drowning out the crepe. So I'll put that right in the center there. Okay, I'm gonna take my crepes here. I'll place them a little off center just for fun. All right, so I have my crepes, nice and light, and then I can put my bananas any way I want. You know, sometimes you want to plate things nice and, you know, really tightly packed together. Sometimes not. In this case, I'm gonna add it, kind of let it drape over. Maybe I'll put a couple of bananas over here just to kind of even out the dish. One guy over here. Now, the whipped cream, the reason we use the whipped cream is to actually kind of lighten everything up, but it also helps tie the whole thing together, right? It's kind of a neutral neutral player in this whole thing. We can put that right over the top, let it fall down. Right. Now with the walnuts, you can do it two ways. I can either take the walnuts and I can just put them right on top, which I feel like would totally work. It's a great for consistency. You know, you get a little bit of crunch. Or what you can do is you can take something like this. This is a microplane. And I'm actually going to take them and just shave it over the top. And the nice thing about that is I'm getting this flavor kind of spread around the whole dish, but it makes it nice and light. It doesn't overpower anything, and really just complements the flavors of everything else. And also people go, ooh, cool. You know, you get a little wow factor. So that's it. That's our crepe dish, and we've used our induction range to do basically everything, minus the whipped cream, although I can't think of any way where whipped cream would be better by using it. But other than that, everything else seemed to work out pretty well, and it was really, really easy to do. As you can see here, I don't really have a mess. I have a little bit of overspray from my pan where I was cooking my crepes, but I made caramel, I made caramelized bananas, I've made crepe with a batter, and the glaze, and I really have no mess to speak of. So, and everything is pretty cool to the touch, right? So this is off. I just used it obviously to cook my crepes. Is it hot? Sure, but it's definitely not as hot as it would be if I was using, say, a gas or electric resistance range. Here's our dish. So let's go back over here. Let's look at the highlights. We talked about that a little bit already. So we have our staged prepped ingredients, right? That was really easy to do with the caramel, cooking the crepes, and holding all of those things warm, of course, especially our bananas and things like that. They didn't just turn into mush. The spreading of the chocolate on glaze, because I can serve that warm if I wanted to. So I could do the same thing as I did with the caramel. And then spooning those warm caramelized bananas, as I just said, really nice to be able to control that temperature. That caramel stays nice and liquid, but doesn't overcook my bananas. So thank you so much for seeing the demonstration. I wanted to see if we did have any questions. If we do have some questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I do want to thank Michael Kars, who is our wonderful producer extraordinaire. He's the one who's been putting all the questions together and helping run all the cameras and doing that great stuff. So I do want to say thank you to that, to Michael. Michael, what questions do we have?
Thanks, Mark. We have a lot of questions about woks.
Oh, okay.
So can a wok be used with induction cooking?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, woks work really well with induction because it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. It's like that one pan meal, right? So we're really trying to use that one pan to do a lot of different things when we're cooking with a wok. So we might be deep frying 1 second. You know, this will be all for one dish. Maybe deep frying 1 second. Maybe we're blanching vegetables the next. And then we are sauteing some vegetables or doing something like that. But we're using the same pan. So we'll cook and then stage and hold. And I put the oil away, and then maybe I'll blanch, right, cooking with water. And then I want to come back around, use a little bit of oil and saute. And then I want to take all those things and combine them back together. The reason induction works really well for this is because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to recover the pan's temperature and get it to the spot we want as fast as possible. Because we have all these other, ingredients that we just finished that are kind of waiting to be added back in for the final dish. And also if you're going to be adding a sauce or a glaze to something, we need to be able to reduce that down, but we don't want to steam all of the other items that are in the dish. So using a induction for woks is a really, really great way to go. Not to mention, as we talked about with, the range being not the most efficient, putter outer of heat, I guess if you want to say, right to the pan, that efficiency carries over to woks as well. I mean, that's why you see these jet burners underneath woks to be able to get them to that recovery state. But that makes them very energy intensive because they still have that efficiency issue.
Great. Can you use a traditional round bottom wok on an induction stove, or should you get a flat bottom wok?
I would say you want to use either a flat bottom wok, which is basically a high-sided saute pan. They do make, the nice thing is if that's something you want to consider and you're not sure yet, you can also get tabletop woks. So now I think the only challenge with that sometimes is that the wok is sitting on the tabletop, so maybe it might be a little bit awkward. But if it's something that you're using quite often, they do make built-in units that actually will have that divot already taken out. The reason I would say to not use the wok, like if you say wanted to use it on a wok stand, is you're raising a lot of the pan away from the induction hob, and it may not detect it, and it might just not work very well. But induction, as far as using induction, like dedicated induction woks, it's really amazing. We have a few of them here. They're amazing. It works really well.
How is baking with induction ovens?
So that's a really good question. We get this quite a bit. I think the best way to think about induction is like, it's not a silver bullet, right? It doesn't answer all of those questions. For ovens, what we find is, electric resistance works just fine for an oven, right? Because really what we're doing is we're using indirect heat. We're trying to just heat this box. Where induction works really well is this, one is that recovery, and two, it's hyper-focused. So we're focusing it on a certain area. Whereas if we're just trying to heat kind of an entire space, it ends up working out a little bit better to just use, a traditional element. That intensity from the induction might just be overkill, and it actually might be less effective than just using a traditional element. But it does come up quite a bit. That's a good question. That's actually asked quite often.
Okay, one more question, Mark.
Sure.
Is a range hood necessary when cooking with induction ranges?
Well, yes, I would say it's always better to have ventilation than to not. And regardless of whether you're using gas or not, if you're cooking, there's going to be moisture coming into the air, or grease-laden vapor, things like that. So, if you don't have a hood, I guess you're going to have to deal with all of the issues of grease and things like that going and sticking to the walls, and it can make quite a bit of a mess. But obviously, it's going to have it's a better option, I guess, if you had to pick one, right? I mean, I think cooking without a hood in a situation with gas is not really an option. That could be potentially very dangerous. Cooking with electric resistance without a hood, I think you're kind of going back to that same thing we just talked about. In that sense, I don't know that they'd be too much different. I've lived in some older places when I was younger, going to college and things like that, where when you're using electric ranges, they would just kind of vent right back into the space. Again, it didn't do anything for the heat to the space. The heat just kind of stays in there, and then they'd have these various filter media to help scrub out the grease and stuff. Not really the best, but I would say it's always better to have some kind of ventilation if you're going to be doing any type of high temperature cooking. Okay, those are really, really great questions. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to doing more demonstrations. If you have any questions, please reach out to Peninsula Clean Energy, and we'll get those answered for you. Thanks again.